Welcome to another tidbit from the book of Daniel. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen. We have arrived at Daniel chapter 8. This particular chapter is of unique significance for the identification and the self-perception of the Seventh-day Adventist movement. For that reason also I will divide this chapter into two tidbits. Let's look at what it contains. The structure is pretty simple. There is a short introduction, then from verse 2 or 3 to verse 14 you have the vision proper. And just as in the previous prophetic outlines in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, the presentation or the description of what is seen is followed by an explanation. In this case, it is part of the total ecstatic experience of Daniel because he receives the added explanation from an angelic being named Gabriel, and that happens from verse 15 to 26, and then you have the ending of the chapter. The vision proper from 2 to 14 is described with the Hebrew term chazon. That is what covers the content of the vision, which is the kingdoms of Medo-Persia, Greece, a little horn, and a conversation about time, which we find in verses 13 and 14. Now, the chapter is, of course, a continuation, and everyone who reads the chapter will see that chapter 8 naturally follows chapter 7. In Hebrew, you would speak about a broken parallel. Not all of the elements in the vision of chapter 7 are repeated. For instance, in chapter 7, there is an animal representing the kingdom of Babylon. But in chapter 8, we jump ahead of Babylon straight into the Medo-Persian Empire. We also, when it comes to what is called the fourth beast in chapter 7, which is presented in several phases, the last of which is with the little horn dominating, we also jump across the general description of that kingdom straight into the little horn. So, chapter 8 takes chapter 7 for granted, and it expands on some of the details, but not all, and then it has a different general perspective. When you read, and most people will read chapter 8 in translation, when you read, however, in the original, you quickly discover a major and very significant change. Most readers will not realize how dramatic it is, because what happens is that the language changes from Aramaic back to the Hebrew language. If you ever try to read a book that is written in two languages, which switch in the process of the story, then you will realize how significant it actually is. So we easily overlook that aspect. But even more, going back to the Hebrew also is going back to chapter 1. The first three words of chapter 8 are actually identical with the first three words of chapter 1 in Hebrew. That is, in the third year, Bishnat Shalosh Lemalchut, in the third year of the kingdom of, back in chapter 1 it was Jehoiakim, now it is the Babylonian king Belshazzar. And as we read through, we will discover that there are a number of similar features in chapter 1 and chapter 8. The king of Judah, Jehoiakim, is given into the power of Nebuchadnezzar. Also in chapter 8, in verse 12, we'll return to that particular next time, the army of God, the host, the people of God, is given into the hands of the little horn, or it's delivered to the little horn. You have in both chapter 1 and chapter 8 an event by the enemy directed towards the temple. In chapter 1, the vessels are brought to Babylon and placed in the pagan god's house. Now here there is also an attack on the sanctuary. So the perspective changes very much from chapter 7. It is obviously in continuation. The kingdoms are now, some of them at least, named, but the perspective is different. We are back in the Hebrew language, exclusively written for those few who understood that back then. We are back in the symbols or symbolic language of the sanctuary. Sanctuary is mentioned all through. Even the animals that are represented in the vision and symbols of the kingdoms are no longer beasts of prey. They are actually sacrificial animals, even those animals who were used for sacrifices, in particular on the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement seems to have a significant meaning for this particular chapter. The words for apostasy or sin, pesha, is used in Leviticus 16, verse 16 and 21, about the transgressions of the people of Israel. Kodesh is a name for sanctuary, as in Leviticus 16. So you have several links. And then, of course, when you look at it, you have the question, how long, which opens up for judgment. So in the chapter itself, there is an emphasis on the sanctuary in connection with judgment. Now, if you step back and look at the chapter from the perspective of the book as a whole, that is, in the context of the whole book, you see the parallel between the visions in Daniel 2, 7 and 8. In Daniel 2, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar about the world empires, symbolized by a statue, closes with an event of judgment. The stone is coming down and crushing the statue. Chapter 7 has as its climax, after the reign of the world empires, a heavenly judgment scene. The parallel to those two items from chapter 2 and 7 is the cleansing, the restoration, or the justification of the sanctuary mentioned in 8:14. So, this is related to the people of God. It is a vision now related to the sanctuary, and it is a vision that includes the issue of judgment. Let me read to you the comment by a very famous Bible critical but very great theologian of the Old Testament, Daniel L. Smith Christopher. In the New Interpreter's Bible, published by Adventist Press, 1996, he writes in volume 7 on page 118 the following, as a comment on the main theme of Daniel 8. Finally, there is the agonized question in chapter 8, how long? The second major theme of this chapter is that the time of wrath is limited, and thus the people's suffering is limited as well. This is surely one of the most powerful appeals of apocalyptic literature and apocalyptic movements. Theologically, it is one of the most important messages of the book of Daniel for a modern world. It is a promise of the gospel that darkness will not last forever, that innocence will not be crushed forever, that judgment will be had. Surely, this is the most important function of the last judgment scenes, such as the division of the sheep from the goats in Matthew 25. So far, Smith Christopher. The theme of judgment is natural in the book of Daniel, in the context of the book of Daniel as a whole. Remember, the name of Daniel actually means God is my judge. It is specifically present in chapter 8, and it is present in the context of references to both historical tribulations and the sanctuary rituals. So now comes the crucial question: how should chapter 8 verse 14 then be translated? When in the conversation between two heavenly beings, the answer to how long or until when is 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be what? And here is the secret of the chapter. It combines three different perspectives in one. There is a historical perspective, there is a forensic, legal perspective, and there is a cultic or ritual, ceremonial perspective. If you think of history, you could translate this as the sanctuary shall be restored. If you think of judgment, you would say the sanctuary shall be justified. If you think about the ceremonies of the temple, you would say the sanctuary shall be cleansed. They are all true, each from their perspective, and all of these three perspectives are found in the chapter. The Day of Judgment, in the ceremonies of the temple, is also called the Day of Atonement. Now we will return to that as we take us a little further in Tidbits from Daniel 8 in our second sections, where we will look at questions galore. That is, take up some of the questions. One of them is, but if, as some say, the question and the problem in Daniel 8 is only the attack by the little horn, why then should the answer deal with the sins and apostasy of the people of God? That is for next time, for Tidbits from Daniel part 2, questions galore to follow. Thank you for listening to the first of these tidbits from Daniel 8.